All right. Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Canadian Underground Infrastructure Innovation Center Academy webinar, History of Utilities, Their Place in this World. My name is Jason Luke. I'm from Associated Engineering. I'm chair of the QIC Education and Outreach Committee, and I'll be your moderator for today. Organized by the Canadian Underground Infrastructure Innovation Center, the University of Alberta and Benjamin Media, QIC Academy offers classes, courses, webinars, and events to help further underground infrastructure educational opportunities across Canada. QIC, these webinar series, we cover a variety of topics related to underground infrastructure. Speakers include industry-leading professionals who will provide free educational webinar to the public, followed by a question and answer period. So today, if there is any questions, there's a facility within the presentation here today to add questions and comments. By all means, put them in there. And at the end of the presentation, I'll be moderating a Q&A session with David. So if there's anything you want more information on or have discussion, please feel free to add that. These webinars occur on the third Thursday of each month at 10 a.m. Mountain and 1 p.m. Eastern. For the full schedule of events, please go to the QIC.ca website, and you can also access there on YouTube even previous webinars that have occurred. So by all means, please go check those out. Coming up here on September 17th in Edmonton will be the QIC Safety Academy. So for more information, I believe the agenda is put together and the registration will be out soon. So registration is open. Go visit QIC.ca for more information. A big thank you to Ackerman for supporting the webinar series here in 2025. So again, thank you for supporting underground infrastructure education and innovation. All right, so moving on. Our speaker today is David O'Sullivan. He's the president of PW Trenchless Construction. David immigrated to Canada in 1978 to start a career in civil engineering. He spent 6 years in consulting before moving to contracting in 1986 and evolving into trenchless technologies in the 90s. He started PW Trenchless Construction in 2000 and presently employs over 40 staff. Welcome, David, and handing it over to you, and looking forward to this. Enjoy. It should be a very interesting presentation.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, this is I won't say it's a fun topic, but it's I suppose it's a fun topic if you're in the utility business. It probably doesn't interest an awful lot. It's probably not a great topic in a cocktail party, but in any case. So we're going to talk today about ancient utilities, and then the Dark Ages in Europe. And I'm kind of a bit of a European based on this one, but we did revert back big time in Europe, and then we didn't kind of reinvent stuff until about the 1850s, and then move forward. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're just going to talk the history of where we came from and how we're at where we're at right now, and how we came to where we're at right now. So I'm going to glance over this because, as I said to Jason a few minutes ago, I'm not David Attenborough, so I'm going to glance over the non-human human, but essentially until about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, human beings were really acting as animals. The differential between an animal and a human being was not that great at the time. We were acting as hunters and gatherers. Yes, we started to live in families for protection issue, and we started to get job specialization happening, but you get that happening in animals as well. So we weren't that different from animals until about 5,000 years ago. If you understand that Homo sapiens has been around for about 200,000 years as a species, it took as it what's that 197,000 years for us to move away from the animal lifetime, or the animal lifestyle. So when you're looking at animals, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at a pride of lions. They live in the wild. As they and as they feed off the food that's there. Once that runs out, they tend to move on. One of the things, and we don't know why they actually move on, and this is, we're seeing this from human beings as well. It could be that they move on because the waste, their fetal matter, just builds up. And so they move on because of that. Of course, because of that, because they're in the wild, you get, the high mortality rate. And it does tend to get you to move on. But that's in the wild. Then what happens is that we move into a situation whereby we have animals again, but we have the influence of human beings on them. So now we've got a concentration. If you take the cows that are here in this picture versus a buffalo on a prairie wandering wild, from the point of view of the cow or the buffalo, there is really no difference. They're grazing, they're generating meat and milk, and then they're defecating. What does happen here in this case is that because we have moved on from hunters and gatherers to a sophisticated society, we do not want to be going out there and hunting a buffalo and trying to find one. So we want to bring the buffalo to us. And we move from hunting and gathering, a number of thousand years ago, into bringing them into fields and controlling where they go and how they roam. That allowed us to then go and get the animals as we needed them. And they ended up defecating in the field. And again, that defecation was random. It wasn't exactly where we wanted it. And then we brought it to this factory generation type system where we're feeding them exactly where we want them to sit, and they're defecating, and we're using that feces, and we're spreading that feces out in the fields, putting it back in again. So we're completing the cycle, but we're completing it in a very controlled manner versus what was happening before. Then we started bringing human beings into this, and essentially we're doing the same type of things with human beings. So why are we different? Well, human beings are different. A cow would not have done that and would not have come into a barn except that human beings intervened. So human beings have that extra ability to imagine, to create states and money and concepts, and to gather people together in entities or locations where you have a concentration of people. As I said before, we've been around for about 200,000 years. It's only in the last 5,000 years, which is about 0.08% of the history of the Earth, that we've actually gone and concentrated. As you know, who knows if some other animal will step up at some other stage and repeat what we've done. We don't see any evidence at the moment of any other animals having done that before. But who knows? We may destroy the Earth in a number of years, and another 3 or 4 million years after that, whales will come in and do what we're doing right now. But slightly off the topic right now. In any case. So let's go and move up to about 5,000 years ago, which is about 3,500 BC. The first evidence we have of a city getting together was the city of Ur in Mesopotamia. Before that, on the last few slides, what we had was hunters and gatherers. People were getting together. Yes, they may have built a building or a grass hut that they lived in. But suddenly now we start to see in Mesopotamia cities of 30, 40, 50,000 people. What that does immediately is it generates waste. We knew that, and maybe that was the reason you couldn't get together in such concentrations before that, because the waste would just kill you off because of the disease that was coming out of it. Finally, in the city of Ur, they did it. They got together, and they started to defecate and just dispose of it the same as we did in medieval Europe, which was just throw it out the window onto the streets below. They then started to see that feces tended to get washed down the street into the lowest area. So they were starting to see channels at that point. Then you move on another 1,000 years or so, and you get into the Indus Valley over towards Pakistan, and they had flushing systems. They saw what was happening in Ur, in that the feces tended to gradually go downhill. And so they started to create systems, channels, if you want, and adding water and so on that would cause it to go into these channels and get flushed down. And then China had similar systems in the Han Dynasty. They also transported their material away. And so what you're seeing there, of course, is you're seeing evidence of transcontinental information spreading back and forth across the Eurasian continent. But you don't tend to see that piping evidence in the Americas, and you don't tend to see it in Africa's for some reason. I don't know why, but don't tend to see it. But what we are seeing here is the start of a process whereby you're taking the material away from the concentration of people and taking it somewhere else. But when you revert back to what we had in the farms, it was treated locally. And that's the big split that we have in how we deal with sewage. As we are essentially hunters and gatherers or farmers, we tend to treat our sewage locally. So you keep the sewage where you are. However, as I said, disease is a major threat if you don't deal with that perfectly. And of course, you get this masima issue, or the smell. The smell all the way up until 1900s was the item that was associated with disease. Now it's a trigger, the smell is not great, shall we say, but it is not a disease-causing issue. But if you go back, 100, 200, 300 years, you will see that people thought it was the issue. They thought it was where disease came from. And you'll see people, with handkerchiefs and so on and perfumes trying to mask the masima, thinking they were protecting themselves. But so it was a big issue. They thought it was the cause of disease. But this locally treated issue is not suited to dense living. And I'll show you some slides later on where people from the farming and rural communities came into the cities in the 1850s, and they brought in their locally treated mindset with them, which caused major problems. Of course, again, if you're doing a locally treated system, you're generally having an outhouse or you're having a pit, and that's not exactly conducive to having it inside the house. The other problem is that there was about a 10% fatality rate with children because of pits. You still see that in places like India, where pit disposal of sewage is a very common thing in the rural areas. It's a very, very high fatality rate for children. But the other big thing is that there was a use for that sewage, so you didn't really want to get rid of it because, of course, it was great for farming. It was great for fertilizer. It was great for returning. So let me step back a little bit on that. And Jason and I were just talking about this a few minutes ago. The whole issue of sewage is something, we talk about treating sewage. We actually don't treat sewage. We treat sewage in a way, but we don't really. Nature takes care of sewage. If we leave sewage in the wild, nature will break it down eventually and redistribute the parts of that sewage back into the environment. The problem is that when becomes too concentrated, that's when diseases can exist and cause problems in the world. So what we do, essentially in our sophisticated treatment plants, is we break the sewage apart, allowing the bacteria, allowing nature to more easily get at the sewage and break it down, and then we recycle it back into nature again. Of course, little issue there. We're getting into problems now, of course, with forever chemicals and plastics and so on, but that's another topic for another day. When you get into then the treat remotely side of things, is that, that's more suited for dense living. It's when we're having houses and we overcome the natural ability of the nature to break down sewage. So therefore we have to try and take our sewage and take it away, take it somewhere else. Later on, when you have the remote systems, you can get into bathrooms in the home and so on, and you do reduce the danger to children. And again, if you're treating remotely, generally it's because you're living in an urban situation. You're not interested in having the sewage. There's no use for you. I'm going to change a little bit here and go on to water, because even though I believe the sewage is the biggest issue we have in longevity in life, it impinges into the water and causes problems with the water supplies. So we get into water supply And before the Romans, well, before the Greeks and the Romans, we were essentially getting our water supply from local creeks. The problem with a local creek is that if there's somebody living upstream of you and they're defecating into that creek, if nature doesn't have a chance to break that sewage down before it gets to you, it's going to poison your water supply. So if the density of the people upstream of you is such that it doesn't matter, then you're fine. But if that density starts to come up and too much sewage is coming down that creek, or in the summer with a low water flow, the water gets polluted in the creek, then we get our problems. The Romans seem to know that. And that's, I believe, is why they started to get remote water sources and bringing it in aqueducts. Of course, then when you start and once they got the aqueducts functioning, then they found that they could build cities up to 1 million people, as in Rome at the time. And so they were able to do that and move on and have large cities all over Europe and North Africa. As I said, though, that one of the problems is that when you get into river water issues and certainly in very flat areas, and you don't have a mountain supply for water like you have in a lot of the Roman situations, you end up taking water out of the river and using that as your domestic water supply, and hopefully that you don't have people above you that are causing problems. One of the negative issues about the Roman system, though, was that they really did not develop pipes. So their water carrying systems were channels. Even though they covered the channel with a lid like this, it was still a channel. It wasn't pressurized. They tried pipes with lead pipes, but of course you had other issues with that. The lead pipe was not as successful as they thought. They were using lead pipes within houses for supplying the water within a house, from a cistern in the roof down into the house, but not from a municipal point of view. Whether they knew the lead was causing long-term problems or not, we don't know. There is some evidence out that they used limestone-laden water as a supply in certain areas to try and mix it, because they felt that the lime added a coating on the inside of the lead pipes to try and isolate the lead from the water supply. Now, that's a thesis that's out there right now. It's who knows where it's going to go. The other problem, of course, with a channel and a lid on it is that you cannot go uphill with that supply chain. You can only always come downhill. Therefore, you end up building these massive aqueducts, massive stone structures, versus, the norm nowadays would just be build a piping system that is far, far cheaper. Now we're back in. So I talked a little bit about the cities downstream of the water supply upstream. Here's an example in the Americas, of course, where the city is not downstream, but the city is in a lake, and that's Mexico City. Mexico City exists in a lake, and what was happening here, of course, was that they were drawing their water from the lake for drinking purposes, but they were also defecating back into the lake. And so, again, you're doing it in your own water and you're causing problems for them. It wasn't until, I believe, the Spanish came in that we found aqueducts coming in, cross-fertilization from the Romans coming into Mexico City, who knows? But you can see from this picture on the middle that they did have mountains in the distance. So they were able to bring water in from the distance. The problem is that did they even know what was causing the problems? Did they know that the waste in the water was causing the problems, was causing the death? And was the death just accepted at that point as just being a fact of life? Who knows? Some of the last slides on the water side. So we started to finally get into water pipes and water pipe systems in about the 1600s, 1500s. The two photographs on the left are from Edinburgh. There were pipes that were installed in Edinburgh in Scotland in about the 1580s. They're actually willow trees that were hollowed out to make pipes. You can see both the bell and spigot there. Of course, you're not going to get a great joint in that. You're not going to be able to pressurize that too much. It is kind of one step up really from the channel of the Romans. The picture in the middle, which is the wood stave pipe, again, I don't think I could put enough lot of pressure through that bell and spigot system, but it is something. We started to get into the cast iron pipes in about the 1820s, 1810s, 1820s. And we were able to seal the joints in those with oakum, and then we poured lead behind that to seal that. Now we were finally able to get into pressures of 100, 150, 200 pounds, where we can drive water uphill and go move from there. And then as we got into, then we kind of upgraded the cast iron into ductiles in the 70s, because we found cast irons were brittle and so on. But the whole thing of a sealed pipe did not come into vogue until about the 1820s, which is a long way down from the Ur of 2500 BC. That's almost 4,000 years. So the benefits of pressure versus open channels. Well, the pressure pipe, the other thing about a pressure pipe is because the water is on the inside trying to get out of that pipe, any bacteria has to essentially fight the water pressure to get into that pipe, which is a big safety feature. As I said, it also allows us to deliver water uphill. The open channel issues, as I said, with problems with animals and or humans getting into that and polluting your water system. And then we started adding chlorine into our water systems in about the French and the British started to do it about 1800, and then started to come into North America in about 1890, just about 1900s when we started adding chlorine. That adds a secondary defense system to our water to make sure it doesn't carry disease and bacteria. You've got to remember too, in 1890, we were still thinking that most diseases were coming from this smell, this Massima issue. It wasn't until just about 1890, 1898 that we finally started to discover bacteria. So I'm going to go back to the sewer system again. So then we started to, the Romans had a big system. They had water systems with the open channel granted. They also had sewer systems getting rid of sewage. And then we lost all of that, completely lost it about 400 AD, 450 AD when the Roman Empire collapsed. And it wasn't until about the 1800s that we started to redevelop that, or refine it if you want, not redevelop it. We now know from the Lancet magazine, which asked its readers, the Lancet magazine, of course, is a British medical magazine. It asked in about early 2000s, what has been the biggest advance in medicine in the world in the last 150, 200 years? And the answer that came back was actually water and sewage. Water and sewage treatment, not antibiotics or not X-raying, not surgery, but water and sewage. The American Academy of Science agrees with that and said that water and sewage is about the second or third best invention since the founding of the United States. Other developments then in the 1900s in sewage treatment, and so we're moving on from that. The other issue I think is not a science issue. It is the importance of municipal governance. That also helped to facilitate this whole concept of pipes and sewage, and it's the development of this municipal governance that happened. So here we're looking at back to the rural system again, even though on the left-hand side you're looking at an urban situation. This is in London in the UK. That pump that's on the very left picture is the famous pump that caused all the cholera outbreak in the 1850s. But in the right-hand side, then you've got a rural situation. So the rural situation is that you get your water locally and you get rid of your sewage locally in a cesspit or in a septic tank. The problem was in the bringing that system into an urban situation, you're putting in a cesspit in an urban situation, and even though the cesspit might be downstream it might be downhill of the well, the problem is the cesspit tends to discharge this material into the groundwater at 5 or 6 feet deep, 2 meters deep, and that then tends to go down, to migrate down, and generally wells tend to be much deeper than that. So you are getting this down effect and the sewage coming from your cesspit down into your water supply. Of course, the picture I'm just showing you here now, the picture on the left is your basic cesspit from, it could be from the Middle Ages. And the one on the right is your cesspit from the 21st century. They're very similar. All they are is a holding tank for feces. And they're local situations. Again, that's what they are. Is they're just a local holding system for sewage, where sewage is stored for hours or a couple of days, and then got rid of and used. It is concentrated in that you're not adding water to it, so it's very limited in its volume. Then we have the systems of getting rid of it. The system on the left-hand side is the night soil collectors. The night soil collectors would have come around in the Middle Ages, picked up the sewage from the septic tank or the cesspit, and disposed of it. On the right-hand side, you've got the modern-day night soil collecting man called the honey truck right now. But it's the same system. But you only have about 1 or 2 days before the thing starts to smell and has to be taken out of there. It's still used in some third world countries. We move on a little bit from that. So we move on to the king and how the king could do it. Of course, it was kind of a halfway between a cesspit and the septic tank system. He was doing it in his castle, or she was doing it in her castle, and of course it's just being dumped out into the moat. We're back into the problem again, though. You're now dumping into your water source. So are you polluting? If there's not enough volume coming from the castle, then nature can treat it, and you don't end up polluting your water source. But if too many people are using it, then you will pollute your water source here. So it's a very delicate balance on that one. As we started to get into industrial housing and change in the 1700s, when the Industrial Revolution started to hit Europe and then come over into North America just after that, we changed in how we live big time. Yes, there were cities before that in Europe and North America, but they were very small cities. Most cities at that point were 30, 40, 50,000 people. Paris in the 1600s was not a big city. Again, London was not a big city. There were only 50,000, 40,000 people. They were able to exist with the cesspit type system and wells, had a high mortality rate, and they didn't know any better at the time. Suddenly we get this explosion of densification of people happening in the 1700s and the 1800s. On the picture on the left, you see the 2 up, 2 down typical houses of industrial England, with a privy out in the back, which was a cesspit in the back, which had to be cleaned out every second, third day. On the middle picture, there's your densification of housing in New York. I really don't know how they handled the sewage there. It would get into a pipe probably and taken into a local channel and got rid of. And then, of course, on the right-hand side, we're back to a rural system again, where it didn't really matter, because you could do your thing out in the field somewhere, and you got rid of it, and it wasn't a worry. But it certainly is on the left-hand side. So how do we deal with it on the left-hand side? And that's where we end up with the piping systems. So as I said, natural waste disposal system. So we're all we do is we augment the natural system to break down the sewage and take it and break it down once we take it somewhere. So if we leave it in rural situations, it just breaks down naturally. If we do it in an urban system, we have to transport it and take it away and treat it then, or cause it to break down and cause it to get mold, cause it to be broken up and treated by the natural system. So 2 pictures back, we showed that picture in London. There was a doctor in there called Dr. John Snow. He made an association with a cesspit and a well located fairly close together, he associated the two together with causing a cycle which caused the disease. About 30 to 40 years before that, about 1820, cholera was introduced to Europe from India, and it spread. It's a disease that spreads through fecal matter, and it became a major issue. The problem was that they still did not know where disease came from. They still thought it was this Mesopotamian issue, that it came from the smell. He realized that it wasn't that. He couldn't figure out what it was, but he knew there was an association between the cesspit being up high and the water being low, shutting down that well and actually solving the problem of cholera at that point. So he was making an association, an anecdotal association between sewage and the flow of sewage in the ground and water. Wow. Yeah. So one of the other problems too is that a lot of sewage is coming downstream in creeks, in rivers, and polluting your water, as that the water that you're taking to use for domestic water. So what do you do with that? Cesspit isn't bad from that point of view, because in a village that's upstream of that, because by the time the water and the sewage gets out of that cesspit into the creek or river, it is partially treated. Whereas if you're dumping straight into a river, it's not great. Now I'm trying to go back. I'm going to go back in time, but I'm not going back in. I'm moving forward in technology, but I'm going back in time. What we're now moving into is the Roman era, but the Romans were a lot more advanced than the British were in 1850, because the Romans knew to take the sewage and get rid of it and take it downstream and move it away from where you were living. Here you're looking at Ephesus, and you're looking at a public bathroom right there. Under these seats, there was a channel flowing with water, and that channel picked up the feces, took it away, and took it remotely away from where you were living. The issue was that they didn't take it remotely enough. They would put it into pipes of 300 millimeters, 400 millimeters, and they would dump it in a local creek. The Romans did tend to learn, though, that they had to start taking it further as the cities got bigger and bigger. You can probably take it and dump in a local creek if you've got 5,000 or 6,000 people. As you start to get up to 50,000 people, you've got to take it much further away. One of the problems, of course, with the Roman system is that this one here, where they clean themselves with sponges, and of course, yes, they were solving the problem of bacteria coming from feces, but what they were doing is they were spreading a problem of worms through feces and the sponges and so on. So they still didn't solve the problem of lifespans more than 40 years old. And then we move on here a little bit further, and we tend to get these flushing toilets. The flushing toilets were first developed by a guy called Cummins in Scotland in about the 1700s. It solved the problem of Mesopotamian, which they all thought was the issue that was happening at the time. But it also made it so that you could put a toilet inside in a house and not have this terrible smell in there. And there was various other developments after that. Crapper developed it, and it's been improved so many times since then. But what it did is that it mixed water in your sewage, and that meant that you had to put it into a piping system, and you had to move it on. Once you started adding water to the sewage, the whole concept of a cesspit became non-usable anymore, because you overloaded the cesspit too much. But you moved your sewage downstream and away from where you were, where it was going to cause problems in your living situation. So when I'm looking at pipes here, I'm looking at pipes on the left-hand side. So this is what we're trying to do. We're mixing the Roman system back with the modern day system, because they were not that different. So the Roman system is on the left-hand side. They're collecting the sewage from the bathroom that we showed you in Ephesus. They're piping it away, and they're piping it out into the ocean, or they're piping into the local creek. On the right-hand side, we've got our modern-day piping systems, and that's doing the same thing. The Romans again found out that you couldn't keep on doing that because your local creeks got polluted. So they went and developed these egg-shaped culverts that's a picture out of Vienna. So they knew then they had to take their sewage much further away from the city in order to have that city in a livable situation. We forgot all of that. And it wasn't until, I know here's a Victoria picture in the middle here. Victoria discovered that in the 1850s, and the next slide will demonstrate that to you. And then, of course, in the 1980s, again, we're developing the same thing again, whereas we're collecting our sewers and taking it on. So when we talk about the collection of sewage locally, we take it from our houses and we distribute it out maybe at 2, 3, 5 blocks away into a watercourse and leave it there and dump it into that watercourse, and that watercourse takes it into the ocean, hopefully. We found out as we grew our cities that we couldn't do that anymore. The creeks and the rivers of London were just so polluted, as they were in New York, as they were in lots of cities, because in New York, again, on the islands, and the island and then the local boroughs around New York, you were just dumping it into New York Harbor. That was causing major problems. In London, you were dumping it into the Thames. You couldn't keep doing that. And so they found out in about the 1850s that it was just so bad that they ended up having to build collector sewers. And that's what that last slide was, with the collector sewers. The Romans had discovered that long before that. So it took all that time for us to reinvent the concept of a collector sewer and take the sewage 5, 10, 15, 20 miles away from where we were generating that sewage and moving it downstream. In London, they took it downstream, very far down into the Thames River, into a tidal area. They would block it when the tide was coming in. Once the tide was going out, they would let it rip and let the tide take it out into the North Sea. And again, we're back into nature. The volume of the North Sea was able to take care of the sewage from London in the North Sea overall and get rid of it. City of Victoria in British Columbia, where I live right now, the City of Victoria was doing that until after the 2000s. The City of Victoria was dumping sewage into the Straits of Georgia until after the 2000s, where they finally got a treatment plant. So one of the other things we get into too, and then this is a question that often arises, is why did we have combined sewer systems? Like, what were we thinking? Like, how stupid is it to have a combined sewer system? Well, I'll tell you why we had combined sewer, or why I think we had combined sewer systems. If you go back and you look at the city of New York back in the 1900s, at that point we had about 500,000 horses, about 4.5 million people. And of course, a horse generates a lot more sewage than does a human being. In fact, those 500 horses generated the equivalent of about 2.5 million people. So almost the same amount. It's certainly about 60%. And of course, horses don't tend to defecate inside in a toilet. They tend to go on the street. So there was no point in separating the systems until, I'm going to say, the 50s or the 40s. Remember the Germans in the Second World War, most of their transportation systems were still horses. They didn't go totally mechanical until, the late 40s and the early 50s. So horses were a very common thing in society all the way through until the 1940s and 1950s. And we are now still in the situation where we're still just replacing or rehabilitating sewers that were installed in the 50s and the 1950s. That's only a 70-year-old sewer. They should be lasting more than that. As we see, the Roman sewer systems lasted 2,000 years. Sewage treatment. We didn't really do anything with it until 1914. We took it to a collective area, we took the solids out, and we discharged the rest of it into the ocean or into a river or some large mass of water. And we dealt with the solids at that point. There were different efforts at trying to deal with sewage at the time. One of the solutions that they came up with is a sewage farm. The railway car manufacturer, I'm trying to think of his name now, who did the very exclusive cars. He developed a town just near Chicago, and they dealt with their sewage and sewage farms. One of the problems is that to do a sewage farm, you're piping it out into a flat farming area. You need about a square mile per 100,000 people. So if you go back to New York area, you were needing about 45 square miles to deal with the sewage coming out of New York. There isn't a flat area 45 square miles near New York to get rid of all that sewage. So therefore, you're back into try and do a treatment plant. The treatment plants at the time, all they were doing was they were separating out the solids from the liquid and discharging the liquid. Then they started to develop about the 1914, 1915 in the UK, activated sludge systems. And that essentially helped bacteria and kept it aerobic and caused the sewage to break down that much faster. It allowed a safer treatment of sewage from the industrial age. Then we started to see more and more treatment systems happening from the 1920s all the way up to the 1960s and 70s. In various parts of North America and in Europe, we started to get various acts coming in and stopping those 12-inch, 300 millimeter, 500 millimeter pipes that were going out of small towns, small cities, and just discharging into the local watercourse, starting to force those cities to pick up that and take it to a treatment plant and treat that sewage and treat it through not just a primary treatment, but a secondary and a tertiary treatment. And we're really just getting into the tertiary treatments in lots of areas right now. So we're still evolving in this quite a bit. Here's your tertiary treatment plant. Here's one of the tertiary treatment plants. But thinking of the size of that, the scope of that, the cost of that, I know in British Columbia right now, in the Greater Vancouver area, we have been looking to upgrade a sewage treatment plant in a certain part of the city right now. It was originally budgeted $900 million for an area of about 700,000 people. And that has since ballooned to $3 billion to have that treatment plant created to treat the sewage out of about, as I said, 600,000 people. That is a cost of about $800 per person per year. And if you don't have the municipal systems and the governance in place to do that, people are going to say, I don't care about my sewage. It's gone in the pipe. Why should I care about it? It's gone, finished. I'm not interested in it. So it takes a strong municipal government to be able to say, no, we have to treat this sewage and we have to keep our world in the way to which we've now become accustomed. The diseases, well, I'm not going to get into the diseases that we had, but cholera is a big one, typhoid and dysentery. We didn't know why they were happening or why they were caused. It wasn't until, I'll give you an example, malaria. The French went into Panama to build the Panama Canal in the 1860s, 1870s. They lost a phenomenal amount of people in there. They thought that the disease was coming again from the Masama. So they had hospitals there with wide open windows, allowing the mozzies, the mosquitoes, to come flying in and out all the time, poisoning everybody. They had no idea. It wasn't until 1900 that a doctor in India discovered that it was actually a mosquito, and it was a mosquito biting you that caused the spread of malaria. Suddenly, when the Americans went into Cuba in 1902, 1903 for the Spanish-American War, that the Americans were able to decrease the number of deaths from malaria in there, and then they carried on and used that technology to clean out the whole area for Panama and allowed America to build Panama. But that was the level of knowledge at the time, and suddenly that it exploded and moved people on. So we finally get into forcing local governments. Well, as I said, in the case of British Columbia, where we went from $1 billion to $3 billion to spend money on our piping systems, it's a very big expense. A lot of people don't like to think about it. They don't want to know about it. They go to the bathroom, it disappears. What happens with it? It's a big expense that has to be maintained. I'm not going to get into this right now, but this is the whole management systems of sewers, management systems of utilities. There's kind of the accounting systems that manage it. Then we get into the actual engineering management of it, and then the asset management, and then the rehabilitation and the maintenance of a level that causes us in this world to live the way we're living. And back to what we said again with what the Lancet brought up back in early 2000s, the reason we live from, the average life expectancy without sewer and water would be about 43, 44, which is how our prehistoric man died. From there, we can live all the way into our mid-70s, late 70s because of sewer and water. And then after that, our healthcare takes us from there onto our present lifetime. So that's the importance of sewer and water. The Romans knew most of it. We lost all that technology. We didn't rediscover it until the 1850s in an anecdotal way. And then from about the 1900s on, we started to understand disease and the spread of disease and where it comes from. And the big part that sewage, handling of sewage, which is the piping systems, and then the treatment of sewage, which is the getting rid of that problem and not dumping it further downstream. That whole issue is happening now, and it's still evolving. It's still a majorly evolving situation. So that's it. So that's the piping systems that we have. I reckon doing some analysis from some government and papers here in British Columbia, in Vancouver, which is a population of about 2.5 million. This would be the same for most cities of that size. There's probably between $20 and $30 billion worth of piping underground, handling water supply to houses and sewage away from the houses into the treatment plants. That's the kind of investment. And if we don't do that kind of investment and maintain it, well, we're dead. We're dead at 44 years old. That's it, Jason.
Excellent. Thanks, David. That was pretty good. Appreciate it.
It's a bit weird. It's a strange topic to bring up. It's something we don't normally talk about in engineering, but it's my weird mind is going there, I suppose.
No, I guess to look at some of the discussion here and the topics, I think this is, kind of understanding where we've come from to where we're going to move forward from, so to speak, is kind of important. So I'm going to ask you a few questions here, and maybe have some discussion. Maybe some of these, I'm not trying to throw curveballs here, but we'll see how this goes. And I think there's one of the themes that was brought up a few times here is about how some of these ancient practices were kind of forgotten over time. Why do you think societies keep repeating the same sanitation mistakes?
Good question. I think it's governance, because if you go back to the Romans actually had republican systems, which was a democratically elected system. And most of the piping systems in Rome were actually installed before the changeover, before 0 AD. And of course, it was just after 0 AD, and I'm really grasping at straws, but at that time, Caesar started to come in, and you started to get dictatorships and so on. And if I'm the king, or I'm the Caesar, of course, I'm in my palace, and I don't care because I'm doing it out the palace. I showed you the pictures where the king was doing it. He didn't care about the mere minions that were below it, that were dying off because they were drinking water that had sewage in it. But if you go back to an elected process, then the minions who were drinking the polluted water could push the king to install sewage systems, and you can see the major cost involved. So it's a major investment, and I think that's what we lost at that point. And there was really no organized governance systems all the way through until about the 1850s or 1860s. I think the one that spurred the British to get in there, of course, is that the Palace of Westminster is right down beside the Thames. And of course, the Thames was the open sewer at the time. So that was an incentive. Whoever put that palace right down there probably wasn't thinking that this was a benefit of it, but it turned out to be a great benefit to get sewers put into London at the time.
No, that's good. So here's another good one. This is going to be a little bit abstract.
Okay.
Given your experience in trenchless technologies, what do you think the Romans would have thought about our current approach to underground infrastructure?
I suppose what I'd answer back is that my cost of labor is a bit higher than it was with the Romans. I can't go out and just conquer Washington State or conquer Alberta and bring back 50,000 slaves from Alberta or from Washington State to put in my next sewer system. So I've got to come up with different solutions to put my sewers in and rehabilitate them. Yeah. How's that for a weird answer?
That's a good one. It fits the question. That's good. What do you think one piece of ancient utility wisdom that you think we could still learn from or apply today?
Well, I think the biggest issue is that we haven't changed. I mean, obviously they got it right. They got the shape right. I mean, look at the circular shape of a pipe from the Romans. The only things that they didn't get right, they couldn't get, of course, was the belts or the joining system, the gasket, because of course they didn't have rubber at the time. But yeah. So their system was rigid, I presume. I don't know. I haven't seen any evidence of what they used for gaskets, but they really couldn't pressurize it, which is not a big issue for a sanitary sewer system, but it is an issue for a water system. But I mean, that's a Victoria one. So that's from the 1850s. But that is exactly the same, Jason. If you go back to go back up here, we go there.
Yeah.
Right. Look at that one. That's a Vienna, 50 AD. What's the difference between those two? They're exactly the same. They function exactly the same. The Romans knew to have the narrow part on the bottom so that you kept your velocities up, so you were able to flush through, and then your wider part up higher up when you got the high flows coming through from a storm situation. So, I mean, the design was very, very sophisticated for the time, and we have not been able to improve on it since. We're still, I mean, the only reason we do circular right now is that we make those pipes remotely, whereas these would have all been built in situ. And so that's probably a better shape to do in situ. But if you were to have pipes come from your precast factory that way, there'd be a pain in the you-know-what to try and install, because they're the center of gravity is so high that they tend to roll one way or the other when you're putting them in place. So therefore, it's easier to have a circular pipe now than it is to have an egg-shaped pipe like that. But if you're building it in place, that's probably a much more efficient system to have than a circular pipe.
So I'm going to go back to this other slide here. There was a question here. I think this is the picture from City of Calgary.
Yeah.
Asking, is this a segmental slip liner, and asking how it's installed.
Well, you're seeing all my secrets right there. That's exactly how it's installed. You can either now. That's a storm sewer system, so it's dry in the summer. You can isolate it. So you're just installing that. If you look at the, I'm going to take can you see the mouse?
I'm not sure if you can see the mouse moving or not.
Okay. You see the jack in there. You see the orange jack in the middle. Okay, we see the orange jack in the middle. You see the orange jack in the middle. There's a plate above that, kind of a semicircular plate. That plate actually goes inside the pipe and lifts it up, and just off the bottom, so you're not dragging on the bottom. You walk the pipe forward into its final location, insert the bell, and then you come back out and get the next pipe. But there's lots of different ways. I saw another way yesterday whereby somebody was using the garage door, a big industrial garage door, the sliding doors that you have in a large industrial warehouse type of thing. And so that U-shaped channel, and they put the U-shaped channel on the overt of the pipe, and then they had the wheel system that filled into that sit into that U-shaped channel, and they just attached that to the pipes, and the pipes just flew along on an overhead suspension system. So there's lots of ways of installing it.
No, that's good. Thank you, David.
Just segmental ones for a dry pipe. If you're doing a live flow sewer line, which is a big benefit with segmental liners, you don't have to worry about it, because essentially the pipes just about float and you're just inserting them in.
Perfect. Okay, so I think I'm gonna ask you one last question here, just so we wrap it up here at the top of the hour. I'm going to ask you to. So if I ask this question, I think you'll have lots to say. So I do need a minute or two at the end to wrap things up. How do you think public awareness of utilities can be improved, since it's all underground and out of sight and out of mind?
Very good question, and I've often thought of this. I don't think we would stand for, in society, I don't think we'd stand for a massive outbreak of cholera or typhoid in a Western city that would cause us to be able to go back to them, to a population, say, see, I told you so, we need to deal with our sewage and piping systems. I think it has to be governance. And one of the problems with municipal government is that, of course, they get way more votes from putting in an all-weather field for $1 million than they get from spending $1 million in sewer. I mean, I've had situations with the public in streets when we're redoing the sewer system after 30, 40 years, and they're given out to me for digging up the streets. And I lost it with one lady one time and had to say to her, listen, lady, I've never used a toilet in this street. You live here for the last 30 years. You're using it every day. I'm fixing your pipe for you, not for me. If I don't do it, you're dead and you'll die of disease. And she had never thought about it. And most people never think about it. They never think about where the water comes from. They never think of where the sewage goes to. But even from an engineering point of view, Jason, you'll agree with this one. It's a very small part of civil engineering, tiny part of civil engineering. And yet it is so important to our lives, how we live, and what differentiates us from pack animals and our prehistoric to the sophisticated society that we're in right now.
No, that's really good, David. I agree with you 100%. So excellent. No, that's really good. So I could thank you, David, for being here today, and thanks for putting your time together for this presentation in place. I think it went really well.
Pleasure.
And very much appreciated. So Pleasure. I want to thank all the audience for being here today, and just thank all of our QIC members. I hope everyone enjoyed today, and if you have any suggestions or ideas for future webinars, please reach out to myself. I'm the chair, and you can go through the QIC website to do that. Our next webinar is going to be, I don't know the date, it's the third Thursday in August, and the webinar will be entitled New Changes to the 6th Edition Handbook of the PVC Pipe Design and Construction. So that'll be a presentation that'll be coming up. For more information and to register, please go to the QIC website. With that, I'll conclude today, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.